Hello, so here we're going to have a look at information provision with regard to demerit goods. So obviously, first of all, we need to start off with a definition, and obviously information provision refers to providing the necessary information to allow economic agents to make informed decisions. So particularly we could think about economic agents as being consumers. So obviously with regards to demerit goods, we'd want to provide consumers with the information to make them aware of the negative impacts on not only themselves but society with regards to the consumption of these particular products. And obviously this is what the market failure that information provision is trying to correct. It's trying to prevent the overconsumption of demerit goods, because as we know, demerit goods pose negative externalities in consumption. So what we're thinking about is when we think about demerit goods, we're thinking about alcohol, cigarettes, fast food as some examples. So what the government could do is the government could directly provide the information. So some examples of information provision with regards to demerit goods, we could think about the Think campaign, which tackles drink driving. And obviously, if you have a look on YouTube, there's a number of adverts with regards to that, making consumers obviously think about drink driving, not only that it is illegal, but also the other impacts it will have on the consumer as well as third parties. So that's quite a powerful campaign. Obviously, the government could also instruct producers to supply certain information. So the government themselves may not necessarily provide the information directly, but the government could force producers to supply information. So for example, supply the number of calories in a Big Mac, for example, provide the information with regards to the saturated fat in such a burger as well. Those would be some examples of information provision. So we can represent this on two different diagrams. So first of all, we can draw quite a simple demand and supply diagram. So we label it price, quantity, we label supply, and we shall label demand. And what we'll do is we'll label the equilibrium P Q. So we have our equilibrium. What we would have is we would have D as being our imperfect information. And obviously with demerit goods, obviously we want less to be consumed. So what we would want, therefore, is we would want an inward shift of our demand curve from D to D1. And with that, we would have a new equilibrium. And we'd have a decrease in quantity from Q to Q1. And obviously, D1 would now be representative of perfect information. Obviously, that's why we have the inward shift of the demand curve from D to D1, because obviously with demerit goods, we want, obviously the issue is that they're overconsumed, and with perfect information, we would expect less to be consumed, and as a result, the market failure should therefore be corrected. And that's why we have this inward shift of the demand curve from D to D1. And that would be because hopefully consumers would listen to the information provided to them and therefore make a more informed decision about their consumption and therefore reduce their consumption. So we're now going to look at another diagram that can be used to represent this market failure and explain how it would be corrected with information provision. So what we're going to draw is we're going to draw a negative externalities in consumption diagram. And what we're going to do is we're going to label our y-axis, price, cost, and benefit. We're going to label our x-axis quantity. Obviously, when we're dealing with externalities in consumption, there's two downward sloping demand curves. we have one upward sloping supply curve, and we'll label that S equals MPC equals MSC. What we will then do is we need to draw label our marginal private benefit and our marginal social benefit. When we think about demerit goods, we're thinking about negative externalities in consumption, and therefore the social optimum with any negative externality is always going to be to the left of the free market. So the social optimum is always going to be to the left of the free market, because obviously we want less to be consumed in this case. So if the social optimum is to the left, this means this is going to be the marginal social benefit, and this here would therefore be the marginal private benefit, and that would therefore be equal to demand. So we can draw in our equilibrium points here. This here is Q, this here is Q1. We can label our free market equilibrium point at point A. The social optimum would be at point B, and there we would have point C, which would be A to C is the size of the externality, and we'll shade in the area ABC because obviously the area ABC is representative of our welfare loss. So the diagram we've drawn here is representative of the market failure which is currently existing because of the lack of information. Therefore, we can label MPB equals D as imperfect information because consumers aren't aware of the necessary information to make informed decisions, and as a result there is a quantity consumed of Q, and therefore we have the market failure of overconsumption of demerit goods. So now what we can do is we can now explain how providing the information should therefore correct this market failure. So what we would have, well, we would have information provision. So for example, it would be necessary for alcoholic manufacturers to alcohol producers to clearly state on the bottles of alcohol how many units are in a particular bottle, because obviously by stating the number of units it should make consumers aware that obviously if they exceed a certain number of units, therefore they are more in danger of damaging their liver, for example, and suffering negative impacts on themselves due to maybe overconsumption of the alcohol. So making consumers aware of the number of units should therefore make sure consumers don't consume too much. That is one example. So information provision, this should therefore educate consumers. And in doing so, consumers therefore, we'd like to think, would demand less of a particular product, and this reduction in demand would also lead to a reduction in the quantity supplied as well. So therefore, educate consumers, we see a reduction in quantity from Q to Q1. And as a result, the externality would be internalized. And what that means is that obviously if the externality is internalized, it would mean that the welfare loss has been eliminated and we've achieved the social optimum. So what would happen? Well, we move from point A, which would have been the free market equilibrium, to point B, which is obviously the social optimum. And obviously this movement from point A to B would obviously have been a contraction down the supply curve. The L, the supply equals MPC equals MSC curve. And as a result, we would see the costs decrease. Obviously, with regards to cost here being on our y-axis, the cost to society would decrease. So, by moving from A to B, the social optimum is achieved. Social optimum achieved with MPB with perfect information being equal to the marginal social cost, which is equal to the marginal social benefit. So we can add that onto our diagram now. MSB equals MPB with perfect information. So the social optimum is achieved with the MPB with perfect information. And as a result, this would solve the market failure. It would solve the market failure because it would decrease consumption of demerit goods. Consumers, for example, would be aware of the external costs on society as well as themselves, and therefore would reduce the quantity consumed. And that's seen with the reduction in Q from Q to Q1. And as a result, by that movement from A to B, we get welfare is maximised. And the reason that welfare is maximised is there would now be no welfare loss, and we would achieve allocative efficiency. And that is how information provision, providing the necessary information to economic agents, allowing them to make more informed decisions, solves the market failure with regards to demerit goods. So just to recap, the government directly or indirectly provides information. So when we talk about directly, we're talking about obviously the government provides the information themselves. When we talk about indirectly, we're talking about the government instructing producers or manufacturers to release certain information. Then, therefore, that should educate consumers because they've now received the information. And we are, in this case, expecting consumers to act upon this information rationally. So, with the consumers now more educated, we would expect to see a reduction in the quantity from Q to Q1. This is if they take on board all the necessary information and act in the way that we would hope them to. In doing, with the reduction in quantity from Q to Q1, we'd expect the externality now to be internalised. And therefore, we would see a movement from point A, which was the free market equilibrium, to point B, which was the social optimum. And therefore, we see a contraction down the S equals MPC equals MSC curve. That's that movement from A to B. So now the social optimum is achieved at point A with MPB with perfect information equal to MSC equal to MSB. The social optimum is achieved, and therefore this solves the market failure with decreased consumption of demerit good, of a particular demerit good, and therefore we see a reduction in quantity from Q to Q1, which we previously mentioned. In getting to point B and that quantity of Q1, we would have welfare maximised as there no longer is a welfare loss, and allocative efficiency would be achieved. And that is how information provision solves the market failure associated with demerit goods.